We have our guests from New Zealand. Okay, stand up and introduce yourselves. This is the Kiwi contingent over here. Okay, say your names, please, so people will know.
I'm Linda.
Okay.
Kavita. Josephine. Shelley. Marie.
Rudy. And Alan.
Okay, welcome. It's our pleasure. For some of you, this is your second home, which is fine with us. Okay.
Yay, Asha's home.
It's very kind of you. Is it all right if I sit? Can you all see me well enough if I do? I guess all of you know, and if I'm not loud enough, I went away for 8 weeks. I actually was gone for 3 weeks before that. I forgot, so I've really been gone most of 3 months. In May, I went to Spain to help Narayani polish the manuscript of the book she wrote about her years with Swami, which is a real humdinger of a sweetheart book, which is making its way through the publishing process. So I sort of went on a pre-retreat with her in very isolated. They have been living in this house that belongs to a relative in Spain, and for 3 weeks we worked constantly on that book, which sort of got me remembering that I know how to write, which I had forgotten over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. I have been trying, and I really can't even remember when I started. I was trying to do the math, but it was at least 3 or 4 years ago. I've been trying to write what I'm calling the big book about my life with Swamiji, which is something he told me that I would write about him when I was 24. And it scared the bejesus out of me. And every day since then, I have worried about it. I doubt if there's been a single day when I haven't worried about it. Causelessly, which is the nature of phobia, I have had a phobia about writing. I really don't know what awful thing happened to me in the past from writing, but whatever it was big enough to put the fear of God in me in an absurd manner. And so Swami has been unrelenting with me from the very beginning about the necessity to do this. I found notes from 1978 where he suggested I should be spending half my week writing and the other half doing other things. Yeah. And he actually wanted me to live a writer's life. But I just find this because I've been reliving my whole life. That's what he wanted me to do, and then he saw that it was absolutely not happening. And so he said, well, you have a lot of confidence as a speaker, so why don't you do speaking, and that will give you the confidence to write. Which, it's interesting because when you sort of reflect back on all these things, so that this was always the primary assignment, and that this whole other life that I've had was the secondary assignment. Yeah, very strange. And every job I had at Ananda, until I came here, I crashed and burned on it because at some point I had to write. I mean, even like anything. And I was so paralyzed. When I finally got here and had to write the program guides and so on, for some reason that was when I began to really begin to learn. And there was actually a period of time where I was in charge of all the promotions for Ananda, so I would write a lot of the promotional stuff. Mostly I would write it. I mean, this is all funny now. It was almost funny then. I would write. I would bring it to him. He would hold it. He wouldn't read it. He would touch it. And he could tell that it didn't have enough magnetism. And then he would put it aside and write something else. And he would tell me that what I did helped him because it showed me what he didn't need to say. And then every once in a while, something would get through. So there's a lot of stuff over history that I actually wrote. But much of the time, and that went on for about 10 years, where he mostly threw what I did away, and I quit at a certain point. I don't remember being traumatized. I remember being traumatized lots of times, but I don't remember being traumatized about that. I just remember thinking, that must have been when he said, just forget it, just do something else. But all the time, because he told me I was going to write, I took notes. So I always had a notebook, and then a certain point, a period of time, I carried a tape recorder, which really is not helpful in a certain sense, because who's going to transcribe 150 cassettes of... yeah. Well, actually, I can't give them to anyone, because many of them were, until I listened to them, because many of them were quite... there's been only a few that I felt I really have to protect, but I let some of them out. Because he would sometimes talk about other people, saying things, and that's what I had to protect. And by no means enormously, but you just don't want to suddenly hear that Swami thought that you were cross-eyed when you didn't know that you were. But what I was saying, I always had notes, and I always took notes. And some of you all know this because, but then I just procrastinated. I'm also very good at procrastinating. And I just didn't do it. And finally, Swami, I remember we were in Assisi, we were standing in his kitchen. He said, "Are you too busy? Are you scared? Are you just lazy?" I said, "I think all of the above, Swami." He said, "Well, get with it, girl." And then I spent 2 or 3 years being utterly neurotic, trying to write a biography of him, which it was hopeless. I look at Connie, because my absolute meltdown day, I just came to pieces one day. I mean, now it's not serious, but then I called Connie, and I was just a shredded mess, and she brought over some essences and oil. It actually was a turning point, but you saved my life at that point. I was just gone. And I worked for like 2 or 3 years, and I had nothing, absolutely nothing. I said to Swamiji, spiritually, it's been fantastic, because, total failure, when you're not a person who usually fails, it's extremely transforming. Horrible, but transforming. So, Ananda Prem needs a place to sit. She's way up on the stair. Ananda Prem, there's a seat right here. There's a seat right here. Right here.
There's a better chair for her right here. Oh, that chair.
Okay. Ananda Prem, this chair is open for you right here. Okay? I'm so sorry. This is the last thing in the world you wanted.
Yes.
And you were going to sneak out early. You were going to sneak out early. Hello, sister.
Hello. Hello.
Nice to see you. I'm so sorry. I just couldn't see you sitting on the stairs.
I'm happy behind you.
Okay. So anyway, so I really struggled with that. And finally, Swami just said, "Asha, this is a non-starter. I'm going to ask David to write this book." And I said, "Great." It was just like I couldn't do it. But what happened after that, David had been saying from the beginning, "Asha, just write stories." But Swami told me to write this biography. So as soon as David wrote a biography, I wrote the storybook. And so I was starting to say, at the end of that, literally at the end of that, I was on the phone with Swami, and I said, except for the fact, I said, spiritually, it's been an absolutely fabulous period, except that I'm trying to write a book and I do not have one usable paragraph. I had hundreds of pages, which I eventually threw away, but there was just nothing. It was just stream of consciousness chaos. It was just stream of consciousness chaos. I mean, I'm just giving you the history because you'll understand how happy I am right now. That's really the only reason I'm telling you this, because this is a big karma for me. So that was done, and I did that book, and then I stopped, and then he shows up one day with the manuscript, the Miracles and Answered Prayers. He was going to write that book. And then just one day he just shows up here and he says, "No, you're going to write it like this." And he hands it to me. And it's just, I couldn't do anything with what he had. I had to start over. But he did it because, are you afraid? Are you too busy? Are you too lazy? And it was all true. So he gave me that, so I had to do that. And there's no phobia on that. This is just a little book about answered prayers. I don't even think much about answered prayers. I mean, and by that point, I knew how to write stories. I knew how to interview and write stories. It was a genre I could do. So he just, he's so smart. He knew exactly what to do, and he got me back. And on that one, I went off for 2 weeks. I went to Big Sur, and I discovered that when you don't have 1,000 other things to do, it's easier to write. And on that experience, I also discovered the writer's life, which is, I don't know, how many of you experience these things, but I discovered there's such a thing as the writer's life, which I had never known, because I communicate all the time. And so when I'm sitting down at a piece of paper, it's not like I have any stored up communication. It's like it's all been dissipated. And I have nothing left to say. So when I just went off for a couple of weeks, and I stayed in a little cabin in somebody's farm, so I wasn't as isolated as I was this time, but I didn't have anything else to do. And I had discovered this when we would travel with Swami to other colonies, because often when he would come to the country, we would go with him to the other colonies, because in a certain sense, those visits were more relevant to our lives than the village. Because when he was in other colonies, with the conversation, what he would talk about, it was just more. So that was how we'd often be with him when he was in America. And so if I didn't have any organizational responsibilities, nobody needed counseling, there were no classes to do, this enormous amount of energy would build up in me, and I would almost always go into the kitchen. And sometimes just, take over for whoever was in charge if they didn't really care about cooking. Because it was something that I could do, and then the colony leader just could enjoy other things, and Swami would be taken care of. But I realized that if I stopped talking, I have all this energy. So this book, what happened here was, the last time I saw Swami, I think it was March 11th, but it was right in that period of time of 2013. And I was in Pune. I'd gone to India, and I think I had some classes, but I'm not entirely certain. But it was at his house in Pune. I was there, and we talked, and he told me the things that, it was, like a perfect ending story. He told me that he wanted me to make a movie out of Fight for Religious Freedom, which Brian McSweeney and I have had great times talking about. And he proposed that perhaps I could play Dayamata. Which it wasn't until I said it to Karen Gamal that I realized how funny that was. And then she and I really nearly fell on the sidewalk laughing. But Nirmala looks like Dayamata, although Nirmala's so tired of looking like Dayamata. But when we make that movie, that we have to play all the SRF characters, because I'm not going to go into it at great length, that's not the point, but they have to look like serious spiritual people. So they have to be extremely believable devotees, and nobody else can play that but us. And so, it has to be a sincere story, which I know more about now even. I was working on, or I decided I wanted to write the book Ask Asha, because I said, Swami, I'm traveling, and I don't have anything that's me. Nobody understands that these other two books have anything to do with me. I need something with my face and my name. I told him I wanted to write more about him. He had just finished Love Perfected Life Divine. He suggested I should write a spiritual novel, which I thought was intriguing. And then he said, and I said, I want to write about you. Obviously, I want to write about you. I said the other book was all stories about you, and I was completely, bound by other people's experiences. I need to get my own experience. And then randomly, he says, why don't you write the story of Ananda? He said, you were there from the beginning. Why don't you write the story of Ananda? So, he could have told me to go climb Mount Everest, and I would have said yes. I wasn't, thinking critically. Sure, I said like that. And then, sitting in his living room, literally the last time I saw him, now what was it, he said? And he went like this. So, and then he was going to go to Romania in June, and after a whole lot of deciding, he decided I should go with him because I'm writing about him, and he thought I should be with him when he saw his childhood home. So it's like it's always been there. Then he died instead. And so I went into seclusion during the time that we were supposed to go to Romania. A group from Europe went. Narayani, Shurjo, and others went. And I thought about it, but it was a long ways for me, so I decided to go into seclusion instead. And the problem with my writing the story of Ananda, which I knew even at the time, but it wasn't the moment to say it, was in a very real sense I never lived there. I lived at the seclusion retreat, and I lived at Ayodhya. I worked directly for Swamiji, and then after I stopped working for him, I worked at the Expanding Light, and then I traveled. I mean, I lived at the village, but my job was to do what we've done here, except David and I went out in a motorhome and we just did it differently. So I never actually had anything to do with the building of the community, like Jyotish and Devi and Shivani and Jaya and Sadhana Devi and a long list of other people who were really engaged in it. It just wasn't my story. So in seclusion, I'm just kind of playing these two thoughts. And I had what felt to me like an inspiration from Swami, which said, write the story of how he built Ananda. And this title had come to me a long time ago, which is Dharma equals victory. And I don't really know if I'm still going to use it or not, but that's the picture. And I was going to write Swami Kriyananda and the story of Ananda. That was what I've been flailing around with for a long time. So I spent, whenever I started this, I have 15 boxes of files, which afterwards some of you can help me bring in from the car. And Tandava can't see something unless it's on the computer, and I can't see it unless it's in a piece of paper. So I had to have all this paper. So I read everything, made all these notes at whatever point I started this thing. And then I thought I was going to sit down, and the word I have in my mind is write a breezy memoir, and just kind of chat the story. And I started like that. I just started chatting the story. And I did it the way I normally do it, which is a little from here, a little from there, just like this kind of thing. I don't remember, because I haven't gone back to look. At some point, that stopped happening, and I started doing a very chronological, literally year-by-year story. And the process became, 10 years ago, I sorted through 40 years of paper and put it extremely into order, and then used very little of it for the book that I actually wrote. But I spent more than a year at that point I literally just threw paper into drawers for 40 years. Little pieces of paper, big pieces of paper, handwritten, typed, and so it took me 12 months, but they're all, I can find almost everything. So I had all that. What do you know? Look at this. I have this incredibly organized chronology. And I even did, not all the way to the end, but I even did a notebook of month by month, year by year, from what I had. And Kalyani, God bless her, those of you who know her, may she live forever and be hallowed by saved everything. So anything I didn't know, she did. And she saved all the villagers and all the bulletins. And she was kind enough to lend me her boxes. That was 10 years ago. And so I copied all her boxes. So I have this amazing chronological thing, huge gaps, but still amazing. At a certain point, what happened was I started just going, 1979 or whenever it was. I think it was early in the 70s. The Breezy Memoir went away. And I started doing this very strict chronology. And I realized that the story had to unfold for the reader the same way it unfolded for me. And I couldn't make any conclusions in the moment that were not happening in the moment. But anything that happened in the moment, which was really a lot, I could use. And that's the point, and I don't know what year that was when I started getting really strict. And it's been a very confusing process, and even still I thought, is there anything I can read? And there really isn't, because it's not yet really that interesting, except in fragments, because it's still just, I'd spend days just, January, February, March, find out everything he did, what of all that was important. I mean, it's just overwhelming what he did. And then what's important, and then how to write it, and how to put it all together. And in all of that, it's not, I don't think yet, all that magnetic, but it will be. It just isn't yet. And when I went up there, but then somewhere in there, and I'm still a little phobic. Is it too much? and I'll say something about that a little bit. And I lost the thread somehow. So when I was in April, and I just haven't known what to do. You know, you all have been so helpful, and I've been in the same position I was 10 years ago where, you know, everybody's like supporting Asha to write a book, but is she actually writing a book, or is she just spinning her wheels? And I just really haven't known what to do. And then I almost know the day, it was like April 3rd or April 4th. We were up at the colony leaders meeting, and Kirtani's husband, Anand, from the beginning of time, has owned 50 acres of land up in eastern Washington that he bought with SRF friends in like the early 70s or the 80s to build a World Brotherhood colony for Master. And in all this time, he's kept that land, you know, against all common sense, because he's had no money, and they've kept it. And then finally, her parents died, she got a little bit of money, and they used it to put a house on this land. And they had when they arrived at the village, they had spent 3 nights at this place on this land. And she said to me, "I see you there writing." And you know how intuitive Kirtani does. And I said, "Yeah, so do I." And it was just like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't know what to do, because the house didn't even exist. So it was just settled like that. And I went to Shanti and I said, "Shanti, I'm thinking of," and she went, "Whoop." And then in a very, very God bless you forever, sister in God way, she said, "Sure." So my issue was, it had always been all the way along, I have to drive wherever I go because I need all this paper. And I took the empty boxes out to the car to actually see how many boxes. And I could take one more than I took, but that's it. My car, I'm driving and I'm thinking, man, what is wrong with my car? I really had more miles than you might think, thinking, I'm going to have to get this car serviced, you know, and I realized it's carrying hundreds of pounds, and it usually just carries me. But, so I worked out, you know, this house is, I'll explain to you, it's in the middle of nowhere, and it's a seclusion house that other people you have to rent it, but it's very reasonable. I had to work out this whole thing to meet Anand's brother, because, you know, they didn't have very clear instructions. I do now. This house it's in the Highlands above Orville, Washington, which is not like a big tourist attraction. Orville is at the Canadian border, right smack dab in the middle of Washington. And you go from Orville, which is here, and you go up to 4,000 feet. And then you're in what's Highlands. I didn't know what Highlands are, but Highlands are the rolling tops. It's ranch land. You know, there were cattle grazing and there were horses grazing. And this house is a little box, a little smaller than a small 1-bedroom, you know, a perfect 1-person dwelling. It's just dropped down in the middle of his 50 acres. It's a little manufactured house. So it's, you know, the size of a railroad car, just all clean and modern inside. From inside the house, there's nice windows. You look way over there, and there's Cheryl's ranch. She has 300 acres. And then way beyond Cheryl is Tim's ranch, and he has however many hundred of acres. That's it. No internet, no telephone. Because where it's located, there's no line of sight, so you can't get either of those things there. And perfectly comfortable. I never, you know, when I was getting ready to go, I just said yes intuitively. And when I started thinking, you know, I'm driving 2 days to the middle of really nowhere without any communication capacity to be all by myself for 8 weeks. And I've never, ever. But every once in a while, common sense would say, you should be nervous. But I never was. I just felt like, and it was absolutely perfect. And because I went to town once a week, some of you got emails from me. I picked up emails once a week, which sometimes caused me, some of the emails, I would spend several days being agitated about something or another. Incredibly impressive what you will find to upset yourself if you have nothing. If you're lacking your usual stressors, you will find others. I drive to town, which was half an hour away, and his house is a quarter mile down a dirt, driveway, and it's 2 miles on another dirt road. And then I'd pick up emails and do laundry, and this Orville is like, it's like maybe the downtown is like 10 blocks, and there's like 5 thrift stores, like the prime retail outlets there. So it was not a lot. That was interesting. Anyway, and I just do what I needed to do and then come back. And the neighbor Cheryl and I visited like 3 times. And otherwise, absolute solitude. For seclusion, if you can take the trouble to get all the way up there, I mean, unbelievable. It was perfect. And I found out, if I don't have anything else to do, I can do it. He can do it. So I was at 1990 when I got there. I was hadn't done 1990, and in 8 weeks I got through 2008. So, but it still, even those 4 or 5 years, there was just no way. I just couldn't. I don't know why. Swami many, many times would say about himself, I must be a terrible writer. It takes me so long to do anything. So I have so many good words from him. And I went through, and somewhere in there, I began to feel confident. I can still lose my confidence regularly. But intermittently, I feel confident that eventually, I think this is going to be an extremely interesting book for everyone. I mean, I lived it, and I'm startled by what I'm finding. Because things look so different when you were in them compared to what they looked like afterwards. And what he was doing, I find that's where the Breezy Memoir just went out the window, because what I thought was true was just not really what was happening. And just, I don't know how to exactly say it, but the depth and the breadth of his concept of the work that he was doing was so much bigger than I realized. And just the sheer quantity is overwhelming. And that's what makes me insecure. But editing is, see, when I was with Narayani, I learned about editing. I learned that you can have the bare bones there, and then you edit it into a good story. And I think that's where I am. But I'm going to go back to that house. I'll be here for 8 weeks, and then I'm going to go away again for 8. Fortunately, I promised a year ago that I would go to Boston and New York. So I'll go to that house, then I'll fly to the East Coast. I'll do about 10 or 12 days of programs, then I'll come back to there. So I'll have about 6 weeks of solitude in 8 weeks of time away. I'll finish the chronology and then start over. Just toward the end there, I finally had the nerve to read over. I wish I were less neurotic, but just there it is. And I saw the Breezy Memoir part, and I saw that's not going anywhere, but it's in there. And what I learned, let me just try to think how to say it. What keeps this person from being inspired is not being able to absolutely surrender to the moment. And for some reason, I have had this thought that when I would work on this book, the purpose of working on it was to get it finished. And just walking, I sat in the house, I ate my meals, I went out the door, I walked up to the gate, I walked to the house, I walked to the gate. It was great, actually. I watched all the wildflowers bloom. I watched them dry out, the ground was very rough, and, I just would walk to the gate and walk back and forth. But on one of those walks, I was suddenly conscious, it was very early, thank you, God, of just the mindset that I wasn't really thinking about doing it, I was thinking about finishing it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I just somehow thought that my real life was after this book was done, which is where I've sort of said that sort of thing to people, like I can't people, can you come back to New Zealand? Can you come here? No, I have to get this book done. So it's like my life would start after I finished, and it was really causing me not to put out enough energy. Just as simple as that. I just wasn't putting enough energy into it because I was always trying to get it done. And if you're trying to finish, you can't recognize that it's going to take you 3 days to decide what happened in 2008. As goofy as that seems, you have only this many files. How could it take you 3 days? But it just takes 3 days. And then in the middle, when I went up there, I was reading David McCullough's autobiography of Harry Truman. And he's most famous for his book about John Adams. I've now read all his books. Accidentally, I realized that I was reading the genre that I was writing. Because he writes these huge books, and he reconstructs chronologically from documents, the lives of these people. And somewhere, 3/4 of the way through Harry Truman's life, I realized that was the book I was writing. Exactly. And I was loving it, it was just one of those weird moments, where I thought, and I'm also quoting a lot from what Swami's writing, and of course he does a lot because he doesn't have any other source. And so then I was going to just read Swami's books, but my poor little brain said, oh, please, just give me a break. So I read all of David McCullough's books, and he wrote these biographies, and then he wrote 2 about unbelievable projects, the building of the Brooklyn Bridge and the digging of the Panama Canal. So I spent like a week down underground building the Brooklyn Bridge in this hellhole where everybody's dying of the bends. And my project didn't seem so hard. I mean, really, no malaria, no yellow fever. I mean, as funny as that sounds, it's just so interesting how God plays with you. Because in both of those cases, they were impossible projects that people absolutely believed in, and it just told me, if you just don't quit, you can do anything. And for me personally, these are big lessons. When somebody looked at my palm once, I'll tell you, wow, you're really sensitive. You were born to be a counselor, but you're not much of a finisher, are you? And it's really true. So I've had a multi-level experience, which I'm sharing with you all as friends. One, this extremely, I believe, interesting book will eventually get written. David McCullough, in the acknowledgments at the end of his book, the one about the Panama Canal, he has all these children and a wife that he loves and all these things, so he always talks about them. And he talks about his younger daughter, whatever her name was, Miriam or Lisa or something, she said, who's 7 years old and has never known a time when her father wasn't writing about the Panama Canal. Which I thought, yeah, that's right. That's how you write a book like this. You don't think it's going to be done tomorrow because you just can't. You have to surrender. And the more I surrendered to it, the more, it had, I heard it. Because I was quiet enough, I was undistracted. And I could just begin to hear it. And then I totally lose confidence, which I'm still doing. But I sort of have confidence that I'm not going to quit now until it's done. And I think I'm capable of writing this. I'm certainly as capable as anyone. And even no matter what it is, it'll be interesting. So I don't really have a title, but somewhere about 2 weeks ago, I realized when I got to the point where he wrote his will, last will, testament, and legacy, Swami Kriyananda, which was, I don't remember what year it was now, but it was maybe just before or after 2000. But the word legacy really got me, and when I went to town, I looked it up, what's the difference between testament, legacy? And I actually realized that what I'm writing is his legacy, because and this is the paradox, and this is what troubles me. At one point, one of the piles of paper that I showed him that was not one of my better days, I took this paper to Goa, and he just, it was all awful. It was my hundreds of pages of stream of consciousness, and that trip was called Purgatory and Paradise. It was one of those, this is really, you are so off base, Asha, this is hopeless. Yeah, it was really, I've had some very interesting experiences. And what he said was essentially, it's just huff puff one thing after another. And then he said the kind of things he often said, I don't really care about the work. What I care about is people and about God. And so that hovers back here and worries me sometimes. But the other side of it is, and I've sort of had this out with him before, and I'm saying all this, partly I'm saying all this to you because I'm testing all these ideas. I've been by myself for 8 weeks. I've told myself these things walking up to the driveway and back, and now I'm going to try them in front of you and see if they make any sense. So forgive me. But I realized Swami's concept of himself for his own reasons is not necessarily the concept I should hold in writing this book. And the concept he always held was that the only thing that mattered to him was God realization. And all of this work, as he said in one place, as soon as it's done, it's behind him and he never thinks about it again. And who cares about all of it? I mean, so many different things he said. I don't think I have hardly anything where he really directly, says, I've done a lot of great work and it's been really the definition of my life. So when I start going through all of this, it's just concerned me. What I finally figured out is, if it's like that, I can fill it in. There's lots of, if it just becomes too much of a chronicle of events, then I'll just fill it in. There's lots of ways to fix it. Editing can fix anything. But the fact of the matter is, and this came out amazingly in about 2005, maybe 2006. Is there anybody in the room who would know? It was when Swamiji was in India and he met the president of India, Abdul Kalam. And there's this picture of Dharmadas and Nirmala there. And just before that, Swami wrote up these documents, which those of you who've been through the history remember. He wrote up the Yoga Institute of Living Wisdom. He wrote a prospectus, and then he wrote 20 pages of curriculum for it. And then he also wrote the evening hospice for older people to get ready to die, and the welcome home orphanage. And this was Durga and Vidura were going to be mom and dad to a whole slew of Indian orphans with bright eyes. I'm quoting. And he wrote those things. But the document about the institute, which he gave to Abdul Kalam because he had an interest in education, the prospectus was one thing, but the curriculum, he goes through all the subjects that you would teach. I mean, economics, politics, music, chemistry, biology, just like a real college curriculum. And he lists out which of his books would be the textbooks, how long the courses would be, how the books would interact. Okay? I look at this, and I can't tell you how many times through 40 years of notes, Swami has said, the day will come when Master's teachings will define all of society. And what I have been doing in his life, what he's been doing, is he's been writing books on every area of life to show how Master's teachings would apply. And when I'm reading this curriculum, I'm realizing, oh my God, this is Dwapara Yuga. This is what happens if you start educating people from the ground up with these teachings as the basis, and here are the textbooks. It was like the summary of his whole life work, right there. I wrote an email to Dharmadas and Nirmala. I said, you were there. Tell me about this. Because I saw it at that time. This is the thing, I read it. I thought it was fascinating. I skimmed it a little bit, but I read it, what he writes really carefully. But I just didn't get it. I didn't see that he'd summarized his whole incarnation and described us for 10 generations, what's going to happen.
Where is that now?
It's everywhere.
In the curriculum.
It's in my files and it's in my computer. No, I actually realized, see, and the other part of this problem is his own articulation of his own ideas is so much better than mine that the whole question of how much, and I actually seriously think what I'll do is make a website, and every document that I extract from, I'll post. Because in that way I can relax. Because everything is public. I mean, I won't put anything on there that isn't public. This is all stuff that was just passed out. But who knew? You got a 30-page document today and a 41 tomorrow, and then the manuscript for a new book, and it's like, and then you're learning a new song. And it just, you just, who could keep up? I remember this young lady who came, in 2010 or something like that. And Swami would say, have you read this book? Have you read that book? Have you read this book? And finally she said, you wrote them over 40 years, he said. And then I said, it's just not fair, sir. I mean, we read them over 40 years. It's just hasn't been able to do it. But it's all there, this incredible legacy. And in my mind, what I was doing from the beginning was preserving what I had in my head was to preserve his many initiatives, because so many things have been forgotten. I mean, here's one that is in his will and is in other places. But he said it from the beginning of Ananda. And this gives you a clue. This is how he thinks Ananda should be organized. Every one of his books, especially, compartmentalized, expansive marriage, meaning in the arts, education for life, the material success course. I mean, those are the ones with this. There's others. All the astrology course, the leadership book, the money magnetism. Every one of them should be its own department. And then Ananda would be totally organized, and you would come to work for leadership. And your creative job would be to think, how can I share with the world these principles of leadership? And he said that in the 70s. And he put that into his last will and testament, that we should have organized Ananda in departments according to these different areas of life. Because that's what Master came to do. And that's what it's just like, and it's all there. It's all there in black and white. It's there in his own words. It's there in notes I took and in letters he wrote. But we just haven't, and we haven't even begun. That's the one side of it. And the other side of it, which is this is my lying down to go to sleep and coming wide awake kind of moment, is, the tapasya. The tapasya was just overwhelming. And see, partly, I got there in I went up to, this place is called Highland Cottage, which I thought was too whimsical till I got there, but it's perfect. It's Highland Cottage. I got there in 1990, and on January 1990, in my story, January of 1990, Swami changed our name to Self-Realization. And in July, or June 29th, 1990, SRF sued us. And that led to the Bertolucci lawsuit, which led to, to the retrial. So from 1990 to 2002, I'm in purgatory and paradise, just those incredible years. But it didn't start there. When I just go through all that SRF did to that man, and all that Dayamata and Taramata did to that man, day after day, year after year after year, and what an agony it was for Swami. I mean, again, I was with him, but I was sad a lot of the time when I was working up there, because just things were so poignant and just unbelievably intense, and how he just bore it all. And his body, oh my God, he was so sick so many different times, and just ludicrous ways. Once Miriam got on the scene, which wasn't until later, but I just have all these files called Miriam. I have his blood sugar, I have his blood pressure, I have his congestive heart failure, and then ultimately we have his cancer, then we have his liver problems, just turning page after page, and I'm trying to, so I'm afraid that this story is going to be such a downer. So the whole question of tapasya, what is tapasya? Which I've been, and Sri Yukteswar says tapasya is patience. Which in the light of my understanding that you're not trying to finish this book, you're actually trying to write it. I really, and Swami would just constantly say, and seriously, I've had to really meditate on this and I haven't written it yet. He said, you have to gather energy from somewhere. And tapasya is how you gather energy. And, we look at it, he says tapasya is very good karma. He said it's not. The only thing I could think of was like, if there's a very powerful wind coming at you and you have to always be strong like this, you just build this tremendous force. And so when the wind goes away, you have all this force and you're pushing against something. But there's many times, I was surprised how many times in Swami's life he said basically, this is not my karma. I'm doing this for India, I'm doing this for Italy, I'm doing this. And I know specifically he did it for certain people. I only have one story in my book about him, but I have that story about Ram Leela being smashed up on the motorcycle and Swami having that horrible motorcycle accident and Ram Leela not being killed. And Swami read every word of that book, so there's nothing in there. But I wrote a quote from him because when Italy was persecuted and they were all arrested, the Gamaus were there then and all of that, like Swami fell in the bathtub and broke several ribs. And he said, I hope it helps. But when I was in India with him with the storybook, because Swami had thrown away my writing so many times, I just assumed that somehow I just assumed he would throw that book away or rewrite it and put my name on it or something. But instead, the phrase I used is he was ridiculously respectful of me as the author. It was like a whole other order of magnitude. And I was incredibly stalwart in my defense of my artistic product. And we had a couple of standoffs. Once I was wrong. He insisted my memory was wrong, and he was correct that my memory was wrong. I said he prayed that his hair would turn white so that he would look more respectable, more elderly. He said he was too youthful looking, and I said that he prayed to have white hair. He said, I did not. I said, yes, you did, sir, and I can see you standing there. He said, I did not. I said, Swami, you did. I was staying in his house, and I went to sleep, and the next morning, early, he comes in and says, I didn't. That's right, you're right, you didn't. I remember now. But it was very interesting. It was an important principle. He prayed to look less youthful. No, not even that. He said to Master, it's a problem that I look so youthful, because he never would have told Master what to do. He never would have even made the issue specific. He wouldn't have said, he just presented the issue and left it to Master to solve. That's why he was certain he didn't do it. And it was just an incredibly important point. And I've remembered it, so every time I always make sure. But everything else in the book he confirmed, which was also confirming to me, because a lot of it was done from memory as well as notes. But he said, I hope it helps. He just said, you can't print that. I said, Swami, it's the whole point of the story. There's no story unless I print that. I said, you said it. You said it. I'm going to print it. He said, no, you're not. Yes, I am. Yeah, God knows where it came from. So anyway, the next morning, I was 5. I got up around 4, but I was already up. He comes in, he says, you're not, it's fine. I've redone it. I made it work. And then he just said really simply, it could be true, but it's not for me to say. That was his words. And when he said that, he thought about it too overnight, because I wanted to say it. He said, it's not for me to say. And it's not for me to authorize you to say it. So it's finessed a little in there. But I was surprised in all my notes how many times he just said it just flat out without any, of course this isn't my karma. Why would it be my karma? to have all these things happen to me. So there's just a lot that is, it's just very interesting. And let's see, I had one more little piece of it. I can't remember. The SRF is the most confusing thing. And I'm just going to have to figure out how to work with it, because you really cannot separate his life from SRF. And you really cannot separate Ananda from SRF, because SRF is the don't ever, and Ananda is the alternative. I mean, even things like, he writes really well, and I was talking to someone just today. Today's the only day I've talked, so I would know. When Swami was organized Ananda, and this is all the history of the colony leaders meetings and so on like this, there was a certain point in the late 90s where Swamiji emphatically declared that all of the colonies were equal, that as the oldest, most developed community, the village would always be respected as having a unique role in Ananda's history and should be respected, but we were all equal. And there was never going to be a mother center. There was going to be a spiritual director, Jyotisha's position, but we were all equal. And, that was nice. But as I read through all of this, you see, SRF has one disciple, Dayamata, who's now passed, but now it's the people who were with her, one disciple who claimed to absolutely know what Master wanted and to claim entirely and exclusive authority to know. Swami says very simply, impossible for one disciple to encompass the work of a master. It's just because unless that person is also the same as, and even if they are the same as, it's just not possible. And Swami said very simply about Ananda. He said, it will be impossible. He said, nobody, essentially, Kriyananda said, nobody will be me. And no matter how wonderful, everyone is, and, Jyotish and Devi are magnificent successors, it's inherently impossible for any one individual to encompass the vision. And therefore, we must establish a system where there can be many interpretations of the vision. And some of them will be completely wrong, but others will just be aspects of it. Swami said, when are we going to start communities? And Dayamata said, I'm not interested. Which is perfectly fine. There's no reason in the world why she should be. But therefore, the person who is has to have the freedom to do that. So there's lots and lots of things. His legacy, just like what he did and why he did it, because many of you, I was talking to Kavita and Shelley this morning, and Kavita looked at me and she said, we never met Swami. And I thought, oh my gosh, I guess you never did. It's like it's not in my mindset, but everything that you're experiencing is because of his vision. And there's many, many, many more who will never have met him. And all of this, just that simple thing, autonomy was not just, because it's nicer, because we don't want to become organizational. It was a very fundamental philosophical point, perfectly illustrated by the opposite. And in living with Swami, hardly a day would go by when he wouldn't reference it. But he would reference it always in this context. It wasn't just personal. It was, how are we going to do Master's work carrying forward? We have different examples in front of us. How are we going to follow it? So I have to figure that out, and not not be gratuitously unkind. Which, I feel rather indifferent, but some of it was quite egregious, so I have to think it through.
You mean after you play Dayamata, you'll be
In the movie. Well, oddly, Swami actually said to me once in some context, I don't even know what it was, he basically said about me, I don't have anything against them, I'm just utterly indifferent. I'm just indifferent to their reality. So I'm not angry. And so the facts are, I'll just have to, I'm sure I'll know. The lawsuit, John Parsons wrote a whole book, so I actually don't have that much specifics because there's no point in it. The interesting thing from my point of view is what Swami was doing and saying and all of that. So I wrote Shanti once I worked out with Kirtani and Anand when the house would be open again. And there's the problem of the fact that from Thanksgiving through April there's snow on the ground, which would not be hard except I would need a 4-wheel drive. It's not that snowy, but it's an unpaved driveway with a long uphill to the gate. And then the road is a little wonky. It's like the Yuba River Road. And I just don't think I would be comfortable without a 4-wheel drive. And yeah, so I'm going back in the fall. What the other part of it was? What was the other? Oh yeah, the other thing was it's so far north. I had 16 hours of daylight. It was like it was still light at 10, and it started getting light again at 4. I guess that's more than 16 hours, right? But it's going to reverse, right? It's going to reverse. But Kirtani and Anand are going in September, and I'll take the piece after and come home before it snows. But I just said, Shanti, I can't do it. I think I can do better here. Mm-hmm. But it just, I'm not the same, but it's true. The Alice Walters, The Color Purple. Mm-hmm. What's her name? Walker. Alice Walker. I'll never forget, she said, I was living in New York City, and those characters kept telling me, you can't hear us here, it's too noisy. And she said she had to go out by herself in a very quiet place because it was too noisy. She couldn't hear them. And she went in a very quiet place, and then they told her their story. But she couldn't write it in New York.
How about the LA retreat? When does that start?
It's very costly. You know, they rent it all the time. I thought of it. No, this is fine. You know, this is a few $100 a month. It's just they're just charging me what they charge. You know, what they pay basically to keep it.
There might be no snow this year.
Well, I still come home. I'll still come home. But they, I think I have an affinity for that spot. I'm not very much that way. But I don't know. There's something about that spot. It's really just quite, it worked for me. I wrote Anand, I see why you never sold this land. Mm-hmm. You know, there's something up there. Yeah, I said to Anand, I see why you never sold this land. Anand was so jealous. I wrote them tons of emails, everything, because he just so, everything. About the mice, about the, I had a long relationship with the mice, and just everything, but it was perfect. So that was a long story. I guess I built up a good bit there, didn't I? Is there anything?
Did you find that you developed a rhythm?
Yeah.
After a while,
well,
how your days went?
I worked as much as I could every day. I cooked and ate all of my meals at home, which no matter how simple you cook, takes time. 2 meals a day took time. I meditated, I energized. I had normal meditations. I really did not meditate any longer, if anything, a little less. I mean, I just didn't. I meditated, but that's all. I walked up and back to the gate, just bing, bing, bing like that, and I just worked until my brain wouldn't do it anymore. And that was basically my routine. And I thought I didn't need a clock. I kept one, but I just worked as long as I was productive. And then as soon as I could tell that I was trying to finish instead of actually concentrating, I was going to at one point try to figure out what that came out to be, but I just thought, what's the point? So, yeah.
Were we good? Did we not write you too much?
Oh, I didn't mind getting your emails, and I was perfectly happy. I had a dream. It was actually about you. You were in it because you represented it. But driving home in the car, I was thinking about it. And you and I were going to have a sleepover. Yeah, I mean, you sort of came over, and you didn't quite have your teddy bear and your blankie, but, you're like, we were going to have a sleepover. And then, but when you got there, I had to tell you, and I was so sad, And there was this other person that I had made a promise to, that I had to keep that promise, so we couldn't have our sleepover. You were sad, but you were very brave. Yeah, no, me too. I mean, that's what we were like. We were like little girls, like this. And I was very sad, and I was very brave. And I had a number of dreams that were, your mind is, a number of dreams that were pretty vivid. And I was driving home, and I was trying to think about that. And I thought, I had an appointment with myself. I had something else I had to do, and I just wasn't going to be allowed to play. And I turned 70. It's like, how much more time do I have? So, yeah, I mean, it was all very, very, not heavy, but I've been lazy, I've been distracted, and I've procrastinated. And you just can't do that indefinitely. There's a push. So, but it's not like it's a pleasure. I mean, it's not like I'm trying to get away. And it's not like the life that I have isn't wonderful. It's that I have this other commitment I have to keep. And I think it will, this is the work of a lifetime. And so even if I have a 7-year-old child who never knows when I wasn't working on this book, that period of time will end. And I think it'll end, astrologically, I turned 70, 72 would be an obvious time for this to be finished, and I've always sort of had a feeling. The other one was finished just before I was 60, the first book about Swami. I think this one will probably be done when I'm about 72. That's 2 more years.
As long as you're not trying to finish it.
Yeah. But the rhythm of it, once I get through this part, which is all these notes, which is, weeks more, I don't know if I'll get all the way to 2013. I mean, I will for sure in the next round, whether I'll get into the next phase. But once that is done, that's just such a different part. The one was very confirming to me when the 3 or 4 years ago, or whenever I started this, and I read everything, I made lots of notes. And I made notes of flashes of inspiration and interesting perceptions. And I had put all those away. And I'm in the last day in the house there, and I was all packed, everything was done, and I had just left this last day. But I wasn't going to finish 2009. So I started reading those notes. It was very interesting. I had, almost without exception, all of those inspirations were what I wrote. And I had never referred to those notes again, which was like, it had its own reality, and I saw it the first time through. And so when I saw it the second time, it was because that was really, Connie, who does a lot of writing and knows how that is, it's just like Swami said in several places, he said he manifested a new kind of creativity, which was to tune into what was there and then express it. And that's what he would always say to me, you don't create it, you just tune into what's there and then you express it. And when my Breezy Memoir was mental. I remember I wrote this little story once, one of my cycles of throwing it away. I wrote this little children's story, and when I took it to Assisi and showed it to him, he said, it's fine. He said, it's mental. You can publish it if you want to, kind of like that. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was mental. It wasn't, I created it. I didn't hear it. But it was very helpful that I'd seen the same things before that I was seeing now. I don't know. I'm saying all this to you. I feel a little bit like when Paula was dying. I know this sounds crazy, but Paula sat there dying, and she looked at this room of all these people, and she said, "This is very hard. You have to help me." Yeah, she just said, "It's really hard. It's much harder to get out of your body than you think it is, and you have to help me." And I sort of feel like this project is really hard. It's not easy for me, and I mean, I need your support because I'm dropping out of your life in order to do it. And you have to pray for me, because this is making me somebody that I'm not yet. I now believe I could become this person, but I'm not this person. And so I need a lot of help, a lot of support. And it's worth it to you because I'm, at the end of his life, Swami essentially said to me, I've told you a lot more than I've told a lot of other people. Not that I didn't really think about it at the time. And I'm not going to say by any means that I don't want that to sound odd. I mean, one of the things I'm putting into the introduction to this book is I was part of a particular circle of Swami's reality, but he had probably hundreds of circles of reality. And all of them were valid. And all I can share with you is my circle. But because this was what he said to me when I was 24, I always knew I had to write for Master, but if it's explicit between us, he said, I can help you. So even though he rarely actually referred to it, he made a reference at the end of his life to the fact that was about going to Romania.
With the fact I'm not sure.
That he knew I was going to write about him, and so he was always acting with that thought in mind, and he was always explaining himself to me.
I see.
He was always, but he's funny, this veil goes over your mind. It was like, I always wanted to know. So I thought, I just had a relationship with him where I could ask him questions and he would answer
You
them.
thought he was responding to your desire
Exactly.
to know, and actually he was training you so that you could write the
Well,
book.
but he asked me to do it because it was in my karma to do it. But all of that is to say, Kavita's never met Swami Kriyananda. I can't believe it. How could she never have met him? And, all of you, the New Zealand crowd over there, it's just like, oh my God, there's just so much. It's just so interesting. So please help me. This is not easy. Yeah.
It strikes me how important it is for us to learn how to really see you in this journey that you're on now and support you in becoming this, rather than to think, oh, thank God Asha's back, and back in our old way of thinking of you and seeing you in all of the context of events and teaching and all of those things. So it's kind of like a shift for us too that I think
Well,
is really important.
I don't want to exaggerate it though, because
Yeah.
I really don't want to make it too much. I actually, I looked at the clock and I thought, oh my God, look at how much you've been telling these people. No, seriously, I thought, what?
It's been fascinating.
But I really, that's why. But I always say, I always do exactly what I want. It's very difficult to impose upon me because I just don't allow it. I just do what I feel to do, and I'm not self-sacrificing at all. I'm just do what I'm. So I'll do what feels like Dharma all the time, and so there's no. We're not made of glass. We're just the same as we always were. But I will leave. I have to go away again. Wow.
Wow, that was really fun.
That was
Yes,
really
yes. I guess if you leave me with nobody to talk to but me. And the horses, there were horses.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate the fact that you share all these things with us. You do that all the time, and it's just
Well, I have to honestly say I was testing all of that. I hadn't really put it into words. I've just been feeling all those things, and I'm finding out whether they're true or not. I think they are. So.
And I thought of, before you mentioned David McCullough, I thought about that because I thought, my God, that guy has to do all this research, and what wonderful books he's written. And that's what we're doing. That's good. Can't wait to get one. Yeah.
Pardon me? What did you say?
I can't wait to get the McCullough book.
Yeah.
All
Well,
of them.
I've always liked his writing. Yeah. I mean, the Brooklyn Bridge is pretty heavy. So is the Panama Canal, but they're all interesting.
I suspect you're more of the person that you think you're going to become than you're more that person than you think you are. And what's going to happen in part is you're going to see that fact more clearly.
I'm going to become a finisher. No, I mean that's sort of what I realized. A finisher, what I realized working with this thing. God was so interesting with me because Narayani and I agreed that I would come in May, which was just the only window of time that I had, a number of months ago, quite a few months before May. And it was because she was going to be finished with her book and she wanted me to come over and help her, whatever would be needed. And she was very secret about that book. She was working on it in India, and we'd been in touch with about this book because Swami told her to write it for quite a long time, but she didn't tell anybody. So I didn't either, because after I got there, she said, "Did you tell anyone?" I said, "No, because you didn't, so I'm not. I'm just here on a holiday." She says, "No, I'm telling people." So then I may have written you and said that's why I was there. The end of all this, what was the point?
Finishing?
Finishing.
She
I thought it was very interesting with me, that's all.
Wowie zowie. Well, I guess that is what happened. And that, strangely, I can't remember. But I gained an enormous amount of confidence from that experience.
Well, you said that you were helping her
Yeah.
with the writing of that book, and that after a while you said, "Oh gosh, this is all stuff Swami told me. I guess Swami trained me how to write."
Yeah, I guess that's what I said, but there was a more subtle point, but I've lost it. The other part was, of course, I got the end of Swami's life, because she was, her story, she told the whole story, but the heart of her story was the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. So I was really immersed in it. And I just saw how it could be done. There's a craft that I've been phobic about. Anyway, there was something more interesting, and so satsang's going to end with a whimper because I can't. It's gone from my head. Pardon me?
What is her story about?
Well, Swami, she was, at the end of Swami's life, she just took care of, and really, his body was non-functional. And she and Shurjo in the last 6 months just made him keep going. His body was non-functional, and he was gone from this planet, consciousness-wise. She was shaving him with an electric razor. This is the intro to the book. He took her wrist like this and pulled it away, and the thing hums, it's just humming over here the whole time. He says, "Are you going to write a book about me?" Now, the exact words, my mind, I guess, is, "Are you going to write a book about me?" She says, English is a hard language for me. For somehow she knew he meant in English. And then he says, "Memoir or biography?" And she says, "I think a memoir would be better. Sir, I don't really speak very good English." He said, "I'll help you." And then he let go of her hand and she finished. And then 3 weeks later he died. So it was just an assignment. She didn't carry it for decades like I did, but she knew that was what he expected. He expects a lot of her, but that was the first thing he expected of her. So, she went through her cycle in India, and Shurjo's father just retired from being a general in the Indian army, and their last assignment was in Jaipur, which is a short train ride from Delhi. Shurjo and Narayani ended their time in India in Delhi, so she would go on the train over to this house, because they said, "We are never going to be living like this ever again." A big house with servants. And she and I were on the Skype one day. She's drinking her tea like that. She said, "All I have to do," she didn't actually demonstrate it, "is hold it up and say, 'Chai.'" And we laughed, and we said, and she said, "They're going to retire and it's going to end." So she worked on the book a lot in Jaipur. But it was the same thing. She couldn't write it. So she went back to Spain. Through relatives, they got this beautiful, isolated, absolutely quiet house. And then she wrote, Shurjo helped her. And then I came. So it's in 2000, she starts with her childhood because you need to know who's doing it, but it's a short book. You read it in an afternoon. It's just, enough about her to tell you. 2003, her father took her to see Swami in Assisi, and it was absolutely instantaneous. And then a year later, she quit her job, and then somewhere in there she got very sick. She had very serious cancer in the middle of it. And then she quit her job, and then she just gypsied She just spent all the money she had. She just gypsied around the world following Swami. And then she knew him for 10 years. And for the last 5, she was with him a great deal. And for the last 4, he just kept her right there. And she was 24 hours a day. She was right there until he literally stopped breathing. And the last thing he did was look at her. And then he died. So it's, yeah. It's quite a story. And she's just, she just tells it. The book is called My Heart Remembers Swami Kriyananda, which just says it. It's a treasure. So, Satyavati?
Would it be helpful if we would somehow limit ourselves in talking to
No, please don't. That's precisely 100%, 190% of which I'm asking you, please don't do that. No.
I mean, so that we could write.
No, please don't. No, Satyavati, I very much appreciate your asking that, but that's really not what I want.
That's good.
Yeah. If we're going to have sleepovers, let's have sleepovers. Yeah. Bring your blankies and your teddy bears and let's have sleepovers, But it's my reality, and I really don't think I'll do serious work in this house. I might. It's really an open question to me. I've only been home a day and we're all going away for a week.
It's sort of like to train you to be able to do it.
Well, I think when I'm through this phase, I feel like when I get to 2013 and I start editing, editing is wholly different because all the ideas are there, and it's just a question of whether you said it right or not. But until they're all there, you have to be able to hear the characters in your head. And so that's why I thought, I'll just go back right away. If it had been reality, I would have just stayed, but Anand and Kirtani are coming and all these promises, so it's just what had to happen.
What's your time frame for going back?
About, what did I tell you, the 20th?
September 17th.
Oh, that early.
Or 14th.
Yeah. It's like almost exact, really the 17th, that early. No, that's great, yeah.
I think it's September 20th,
Yeah.
November 17th.
That's what I remembered, yeah. Okay, so the 20th. Just whatever, a Sunday and a Tuesday, and then all.
Sunday is the 17th.
Right. And if I do Tuesday classes, I can wait till Wednesday. A day or two doesn't matter. I just need to settle, and then I have to go back to Seattle.
And when do you go to Boston?
I think I have to fly on the 26th of September. So it's two wonderful, long driving days. It's 1,000 miles.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I just wish it was closer.
It's what? What did you say?
It's 1,000 miles, almost
What
literally.
would it cost?
Pardon me? And it's just nowhere. You have to have a car. And I have to carry all these boxes.
And that's September 26th?
No, that's when I have to fly to Boston.
That's what I mean.
So
So you'll be going up there for a week, and then you'll leave from there for Boston?
Yeah, I'll fly from Seattle. Or Spokane, probably Seattle. It's, 5 hours to Seattle. I don't know. I listened to the entire audiobook of Revelations of Christ, on, much of it on the way up. I finished it on the way down. Then I listened to the entire Messiah, and then I listened to the oratorio. So I had a great time. I mean, go down, hallelujah, and, it's just like, oh, whoa. It was glorious. So I thought, I don't like that sort of thing, but I didn't mind at all. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. I'm so fortunate. Thank you. So we'll have a spiritual renewal week, and we have the Land of Golden Sunshine.